a historic preservation plan in the Up County, ways to reduce runoff, and envisioning the future of downtown Silver Spring development. All that and the latest news coming up next on Montgomery Plans. Thanks for watching Montgomery Plans. I'm Michael Brown. We are here to bring you up to date on important land use issues facing those who live and work in Montgomery County. Today's show visits properties considered for historic designation in and around Damascus. Then we'll follow the planning director as he envisions future downtown Silver Spring development with an internationally known architect. Last, we'll learn how to build a rain barrel. But first, let's go to the top news-making decisions of the Montgomery County Planning Board.
Welcome to Plans in the News. I'm Susan Kennedy. How do we make our communities more sustainable? It's an issue planners across the country are grappling with every day. Changing demographics, the rising cost of doing business, and providing the right mix of housing are just some of the things planners and smart growth experts discussed at the Makeover Montgomery conference held in downtown Silver Spring. The conference was co-hosted by the Montgomery County Planning Department and the National Center for Smart Growth at the University of Maryland. Innovative solutions to some of the suburb's most pressing problems like sprawl and congestion were highlighted during the two-day event.
Most suburbs in the United States were built in the post-war era, which was quite a different time. We had entirely different family structures, we had different gasoline prices, we had different habits. So things have changed over the last few decades, and it's time to think about what suburbs should look like in the 21st century.
We are the fifth most densely populated state in the nation, and we're still projected to grow by 1.1 million new Marylanders in the next 25 years. So whether you're interested in your community, your county, small towns, big towns, your local river, Chesapeake Bay, what have you, growing smart is essential.
The conference offered more than a dozen sessions that were presented by smart growth experts from across the United States.
What mix would you say leads to a successful design for a town center?
We say you have to design it to accommodate retail.
From zoning and policy to infill development, conference participants walked away with new tools to use in their communities.
Learned a lot about my own jurisdiction, why we've been doing some things well and some things not so well. I work in Howard County, and we've been paying close attention to the Route 1 corridor. So the idea of how you're doing sort of corridor development matches well, I think, with the discussion that we just heard. So we're going to have to think about this.
It's really a pleasure to be out among other planners. I'm an urban planner. I work for Montgomery County Department of Housing and Community Affairs. And it's great to share ideas with other planners, get ideas and innovations on what is happening in some of the corridor developments.
Even the experts agree planning can be a complicated issue, but say that what we are trying to solve here in Montgomery County is where much of Maryland, if not the nation, needs to go.
And when you have a state, like I said, that is densely populated, we're not just doing simple greenfield development anymore. We really need to do is infill, redevelopment, revitalization. That brings in a whole host of issues, from stormwater management to infrastructure, roads, highways, transit, to communities, having communities be excited about new growth and not opposing it if it's good growth. So all these things do get complicated. We try to keep it as simple as we can, but we're thinking Plan Maryland, we're very hopeful Plan Maryland will be one of the most important ways in the long term that we move forward in the smartest way possible.
And who would have thought you could have gotten a high-end grocery store to put itself right in the heart of Silver Spring? Who would have ever thought that would work?
Montgomery County is becoming much more of an urbanized place. We're going to need to rely on transit a lot more than we have in the past. We no longer have the two-income households, with the traditional families. So it's time for Montgomery County to rethink how it's going to accommodate the new folks and the new environmental conditions.
It's been close to a decade since the redevelopment of Clarksburg began. In that time, thousands of new homes have been built throughout that community. But there is still one piece of the Clarksburg redevelopment that is missing: retail. The good news is folks in Clarksburg may be getting a grocery store sooner rather than later. Planners recommend altering the staging of the master plan to allow the building of a grocery store outside the village town center.
This is about retail. There's enough housing units to support retail, and the retail is stopped because of the way the master plan was written. There's a special staging element of the plan that requires the town center to go first, and for their own reasons they're not able to go first. So we're opening it up for the other village centers to go first, so it could be built immediately.
The village centers are organized in the master plan to serve the residents. The residents have for a number of years voiced repeated concerns about the delay of community serving retail in their community. In that sense, they've been somewhat isolated with long distance drives to shopping. So the amendment simply changes the stage 3 timing criteria that had required the first part of the retail to occur in this town center to allow the New Cut Road and Cabot Branch neighborhoods to go forward without that master plan recommendation hindering them from doing so.
The proposal has been pushed forward by Councilmember Craig Rice, whose district includes the up-county community of Clarksburg. New to the council this year, Rice told us a town meeting he held at the beginning of his term made him realize Clarksburg was in need of immediate attention.
Well, as a basis of the Clarksburg Town Hall meeting, one of the primary focuses, not just road infrastructure, but also retail infrastructure, was a primary importance. And so folks said that they really wanted to make sure that we move forward with having some sort of grocery store retail in Clarksburg. And so that's when we came up with the idea of doing the master plan amendment that would move retail forward to not just be limited to the Clarksburg Town Center, but to be open wherever in Clarksburg.
The approved Clarksburg master plan includes staging guidelines that certain development cannot proceed until other aspects have been implemented. This amendment does not remove all staging provisions from the master plan. It simply adds an exception for a grocery store.
The outcome, we want to see the same. The town center, we want to evolve into a special core area for the entire planning area. It's going to take longer than originally anticipated, but this is the outcome that the master plan sought with the early development provision. So while one of the village centers is likely to occur earlier than the town center, the ultimate development, we hope, will conform to the vision of the master plan.
The board plans on transmitting the amendment back to the council for action sometime later this summer. Well, that wraps up this edition of Plans in the News. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. The Planning Board doesn't only focus on buildings in our future, it also works to protect those from our past. Our focus segment today takes a look back at our history. There are over 420 historic sites and 21 historic districts in Montgomery County, and each provides a window to the lives of those who came before us. Let's look at some sites in the Upper Patuxent area that are being considered for historic designation.
Near the northernmost tip of Montgomery County is the area planners call the Upper Patuxent. Just east of the Patuxent River, near where Montgomery, Frederick, Howard, and Carroll counties converge, is land that's home to some important historic structures, some of which go back to the 18th century. Recently, I met up with historic preservation planner Sandra Eula, who has been studying the history of the area as part of a proposed amendment to the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. What can you tell us about the history of northeastern Montgomery County?
So this area was probably developed and settled a little more slowly than other places in the county because it's actually got a very hilly terrain and it's remote. The first settlers were from the Chesapeake. They were planters and they moved from the south into this area. They were tobacco planters and most of them were tenants rather than owners. They came starting in the 1700s. One of the oldest roads in the county is this road right here, Damascus Road. It forms part of a route that ran from Frederick all the way to Annapolis.
The Planning Board has recommended designating 10 individual sites in this area, as well as 2 historic districts. One of those districts surrounds the Etchison Country Store on Damascus Road.
Well, historic districts are groups of resources, buildings, structures, landscape features that may not have any architectural or historical significance each on their own, but collectively do. So one of the proposed historic districts is right here in Etchison. We have 5 tax parcels with 7 structures, and this was a great example of the kinds of crossroads communities that developed out here in the rural areas of Montgomery County.
Here you find the William and Pearl Moore House, the Hawkins Feed Store, the Walter and Ida Allnut House, and the Nettie Hawkins Store, now known as the Etchison Country Store.
The Etchison Country Store has been on this site in one form or another since at least 1879. This is the second building on the site. The first building was removed, and this was built in 1915 on its foundations. The first store was built by Marcellus Etchison, who was a storekeeper. He sold the store to the Hawkins family, and they lived right next door at the Nettie Hawkins house, and they worked in the store. This store is unusual for the Upper County because it was built in 1915 in a bungalow style, which was a new style at the time. Normally stores were a front gable, very simple type of structure.
Next, we traveled to Claygetsville, the second historic district proposed for designation. It, too, is located at a crossroads, at the intersection of Kemptown and Ridge Roads, where we see the hub of this community, the Montgomery Chapel Methodist Protestant Church, now home to the St. Thomas Orthodox Syrian Church.
This church is the heart of the proposed Claygetsville Historic District. The land for the church was given by the Moxley family, which settled this area in 1783, and right across the road is the Friendship Farm, which was the historic location of the Moxley family, and 8 generations have lived there. It goes back to 1783. So this church was built in 1904, but it was the second church located at this crossroads. The first one was built in 1871, and when the church got old, they took it down and put this church up.
The cemetery behind the church is also historic. There are graves dating back to the late 1800s. You'll see some of the same names again and again: Mullenix, Brown, Moxley.
And studying those headstones shows you what a strong kinship community Claygetsville is. It's quite unique up in the Upper County. People have lived here for generations and carved properties off of the farms to live on.
We concluded our tour at the Claygett Brandenburg Farm on Mullenix Mill Road. This has been a farm since the 1800s, and the story of the land can be seen through the buildings that remain.
Well, this building right here, modest though it may seem, is one of the rarest buildings in the county. This is a standing tobacco house. It's probably the best example of a standing tobacco house in Montgomery County, and sadly it's the only tobacco house left in the Upper Patuxent, where there used to be many. Tobacco houses in Montgomery County represent our heritage. Montgomery County was settled because of tobacco. People came here to find new lands to grow tobacco. We've built the same kind of building all through the 1700s, the 1800s, and the 1900s. We call them tobacco houses here, not tobacco barns. So you can see it's made of logs. They're chinked and daubed between the logs to keep smoke in. The corners are fitted together. It has a steeply pitched roof, and when we look inside, you'll see that there are cross poles in the steeply pitched roof, and we can hang tobacco lathes and spears with tobacco stalks on them to dry. It's right on the road, which is another important aspect because it was hard to move the tobacco. Often the leaves were put in barrels and rolled along the roads. So unlike many of the other farm outbuildings, these were normally placed right on the road.
On the same property is a newer barn that illustrates how farming practices began to change.
In the 1830s, we moved to a new kind of agriculture, although we still kept farming tobacco in Montgomery County, and particularly in the Upper Patuxent. This was one of the last areas to grow tobacco. But the bank barns were built starting in the 1830s. This one was probably built after 1860, and they were multi-purpose barns. They're monolithic. They're bigger than anything that you ever saw in the rural landscape to that date. The lower levels are for livestock, and the upper levels are for threshing and for granaries and for storage. They were banked into a hillside so that you could follow a ramp and you could drive the wagon right into the upper level and do the threshing. And this is a great example of a bank barn.
By designating these historic properties, important examples of our heritage will remain in the landscape for future generations to appreciate. But what does this mean for the property owners?
Well, it means that change will be regulated and reviewed to ensure compatibility with the architectural and historical character of the property and the features on the property. It doesn't mean that you can't make changes. It doesn't mean that you have to restore it back to some earlier period. You can put additions on it. You can make certain kinds of changes. Exterior changes are regulated. So it means that you go through an extra process where a historic area work permit application is reviewed by Historic Preservation staff and the Historic Preservation Commission. And they approve a very high percentage of those, and staff will work with people. We recognize that there's an obligation on property owners, so there's actually a county tax credit that's available for maintenance and exterior changes that you might make.
Historic preservation planners are drafting a master plan amendment reflecting the Planning Board's recommendations on what resources to designate in the Upper Patuxent. That document will be transmitted this spring to the County Council, which makes the final determination on designating historic resources in the county. To learn more about the Upper Patuxent Plan, as well as information about tax credits and other opportunities for owners of historic homes, visit our website.
When Montgomery Plans returns, Around Town with Rollin Stanley. Stay with us.
Today in Montgomery County, foreign-born residents account for 30% of our population.
Uno de cada 3 habitantes habla un idioma distinto al inglés en su casa.
今日盟郡每7人中就有1人无法用英语交流。
Le gouvernement local de Montgomery County cherche à supprimer les barrières linguistiques et à améliorer la communication et l'accès aux services pour les résidents étrangers.
카운티 부서 통역과 번역을 통해 지원을 제공할 수 있습니다. 카운티의 홈페이지는 5가지 언어로 번역될 수 있습니다.
Văn phòng đều có nguồn lực để cung cấp dịch vụ hỗ trợ ngôn ngữ, bao gồm cả cảnh sát, y tế và dịch vụ con người, thư viện, bảo vệ người tiêu dùng và những dịch vụ cho những người cao niên.
በማንጋመሪ ካውንቲ ውስጥ በጣም አስፈላጊ የሆኑ መረጃዎችና ማስታወቂያዎች ሁሉ በተለያዩ ቋንቋዎች ተተርጉመው ይገኛሉ። እንደዚሁም አብዛኛዎቹ የመንግስት መስሪያ ቤቶችና ቢሮዎች የተለያዩ ቋንቋዎችን የሚናገሩ ሰራተኞች አሏቸው። ካስፈለገም በአስተርጓሚነት ሊረዱ ይችላሉ።
If you need language assistance or know somebody who does, just ask county staff. They'll be glad to help. For more information, go to montgomerycountymd.gov/LEP.
Welcome back. I'm Michael Brown. The revitalization of downtown Silver Spring is one of the great success stories of Montgomery County planning. This effort has moved to the second stage of development, but the end goal remains the same: to make Silver Spring an even more desirable place to live, work, and visit, with more housing choices, shopping, public spaces, and ways to get around. Coming up next on Around Town, Planning Director Roland Stanley envisions the possibilities.
In this segment of Around Town, we caught up with Planning Director Roland Stanley and Toronto architect Denny Paletti as they took a walking tour of the south side of downtown Silver Spring.
So Denny, you've seen this building a couple times. This is where Ann and I lived for 3 years, and a fabulous location. I mean, we just loved living here. We're so connected to everything. But one of the things I wasn't as happy about was some of the aspects of like the site design on the building. And you've done a lot of great buildings up in Toronto. What kind of thoughts do you have? What could we have done to just improve on this a little bit?
What's unfortunate is that this is set so far back from the street. So any retail that you have along here is disjointed from the people walking along the sidewalk. So I would have maybe taken this and brought it out closer to the street. I think the retail could have probably done a lot better.
Indeed, lessons have been learned along the way of this process. But one of the most recent accomplishments of the redevelopment is the new Silver Spring Civic Center, which has received rave reviews from folks from all walks of life.
We were at the Civic Center today, which for me is like the new modern building in Montgomery County.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
I think that building is quite beautiful, actually, and you would hope that new development would take cues from that. Because it's just a well-proportioned, fantastic materials. I think it's an awesome piece of architecture. It's a great civic building.
With rocking chairs in the front.
With rocking chairs in the front. That's it's great.
And what I want to do now is just we'll go down the street a bit and look at the new library that's just under construction. We'll have a chat about that. Okay. The architects finally came up with something that is really, I think, going to be a wonderful tool to tie the new part of downtown Silver Spring to the old part. And there it is.
Work is currently underway at the new library, and when it's finished, this piece of 21st century architecture will be a focal point for the downtown.
The fact that it's an 8-story building, I think, is important to have and have that presence at this corner as a civic building. The fact that it's a nice modern piece of architecture with a lot of glazing, I think is going to look spectacular at night and also during the day. So whether you're driving south or whatever direction this is on the street or in this direction, it's going to be very, very impactful. So it's actually a positive thing to see.
And all that light that you're talking about, and at night when the building's not occupied, with the light coming out, I mean, it really is going to add to how people feel about being at this corner.
I think it's a great focal point, so it's going to add a lot of dynamics to the building.
And what I'd like to do now is let's just walk down half a block, get to the next corner, and get a flavor of this transition between what we see here and what could be further south.
Fenton Village, located just south of downtown, is also in the queue for some updates. Plans for the area include a local neighborhood retail center recharged with the flavor of multicultural restaurants and businesses. Residences like this will be another housing option in Fenton Village. In the end, this redevelopment piece will be the finishing touch in the shaping of this community.
You know, I see these buildings, like when you actually look at the right-of-way, the width of this street and the height of those buildings, those buildings should be at least 4 stories high. 4 to 6 stories minimum, based on the width of this street.
Right.
Right. They completely look disproportionate to this road.
When the library goes in, people are going to start to realize what the assets are.
Yeah.
You've got the Safeway, you've got the Whole Foods, you've got the movie theater, you've got the dry cleaner, you've got the restaurants, you've got the transit. I mean, you really have absolutely everything in this little area. You've got the single-family neighborhood over there if you want to go for a walk on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, this
cool.
is going to anchor the area, and it's going to bring businesses closer to it, right? It's going to start to populate it.
Well, that wraps up this Around Town segment. We'll be back again next time, maybe in your neighborhood.
Rain barrels are becoming increasingly popular among homeowners here in Montgomery County. They can help reduce water and sewer bills, as well as create a reservoir for lawn irrigation or car washing. Recently, the Department of Environmental Protection presented a rain barrel workshop at Brookside Gardens. Participants learned not only how to make a rain barrel, but also how they help the environment.
Rain barrels help improve water quality. They make it so that the streams might potentially, with all our other efforts, be more fishable, more playable, and better quality. Residents of Montgomery County live within a half mile of a creek. So this is a really big resource that we want to have access to. We don't want to have to put up signs saying don't touch the water.
Rainwater runoff from roofs can deliver a toxic punch. Pesticides, fertilizers, oil, and grease are some of the biggest culprits. The goal is to control the rainwater from going into the streams as much as possible.
We're trying to catch the water before it hits the storm drain system. So it comes off the roof, it goes into the barrel, and then it can be redirected instead of to your driveway out to a planted area. Rain barrels have gotten incredibly popular. People are starting to grasp that there could be shortages of water, and maybe they want to do something that seems better for the environment, and so they'll start with a rain barrel. And usually people that start with the rain barrel are first impressed with how much water comes off their roof. They had no idea. And so then they'll get more barrels, or they'll think, well, how else can I do this? And so it's a good starting point. It's not something they have to grow, it's something that they can build. Right here, you would silicone there and then screw it in.
With the help of Ann English, these participants learned how to build their own rain barrels at Brookside Gardens in Wheaton.
What they have to do is get the parts. They pick up one part from each of the bins. Yeah, a locking ring, a drilled out bung, and a solid bung. Oh, thank you. And then we've given them instruction on how to put it together, and they assemble the parts. You need to get a tube of silicone. Okay. So we need to go find one of those, and you're gonna screw that in. Okay. Like that.
Very precise here. Like we almost know what we're doing.
Yeah, and this is where this full flow thing will then screw on like that.
It's very easy.
So I want to put this on the side of the house to water my garden in the summer when we don't get so much rain.
And my yard is all garden. I have no turf grass whatsoever. It's all native plants. But when August comes, it gets very dry, and I'm hoping this will help out.
I don't have hoses where my vegetable garden is or where a lot of the south side of my house is, so I carry a lot of water in buckets from the spigots, and I can see getting one for each corner of the house.
Thinking here, thinking outside the barrel. We have a lot of drainage problems in our area, and I want to show this to the other people and share it and say maybe it'll nudge them a little bit. We owe it to the environment and to ourselves in the future to take precautions now.
That's going to be the top.
Exactly. It's easier to fix now than later. It gets harder and more expensive as we put it off.
It costs $1 million a mile to restore streams. That's a lot of money. One rain barrel by itself doesn't do a whole lot.
See my beautiful silicone job?
200 gallons for 4 rain barrels will get about a quarter of the runoff off the roof, and our consultants tell us that if we can control 30% of the runoff in our neighborhoods, we can meet our stormwater requirement. We have a chance, and when we do restore the streams, that 10 years from now we won't have to redo the streams. This county's been really forward-thinking in the last 15 to 20 years in putting in stormwater ponds and other means to control, but we're just out of a lot of those large parcels, and so we need people to do it individually on their lots.
All I have to do is wait for the rain tomorrow.
Oh, it's easy. It's really not that heavy, and you can actually maneuver it. It's really easy to put it in. Now, hopefully it will fit. If I can do it, anybody can do it. There we go. Here it is. On the way home.
To learn more about how you can help control runoff, visit the Department of Environmental Protection Rainscapes website at www.montgomerycountymd.gov/rainscapes. Well, that does it for this edition of Montgomery Plans. For more information on these and other planning board topics, visit our website. Join us again next time when we bring you more on the issues that affect quality of life here in Montgomery County. I'm Michael Brown, and thanks for watching.